The Gaza war that erupted in October 2023 is one of the deadliest conflicts of modern times for civilians. Gaza is a small strip of land along the Mediterranean, home to more than 2 million people, packed into one of the most densely populated places on Earth. When the war began, it quickly turned into a nightmare for families who had nowhere safe to go. Airstrikes, artillery fire, and ground invasions struck not only military targets, but also residential buildings, hospitals, schools, and refugee shelters. The result has been tens of thousands of deaths, with children making up a large share of the victims. A key element of this war is the blockade, which means sealing off a territory to restrict the flow of people and supplies. In Gaza, crossings were closed or tightly restricted, cutting off fuel, food, water, and medical equipment. When fuel does not reach hospitals, electricity stops, incubators for newborns shut down, and surgeries cannot be performed. When trucks carrying food are blocked, bakeries close and families begin to starve. Entire neighborhoods were leveled, aid convoys were delayed or attacked, and shelters full of displaced people were in it. Millions of people were displaced from their homes and forced into overcrowded shelters with no clean water. Families often lived for weeks without enough food, and diseases began spreading in packed conditions. UNRWA, the UN agency that runs many shelters and schools, reported that its facilities were bombed and that its staff were killed while trying to protect civilians. Even when aid arrived, it was far too little to meet the needs of such a large population. The Gaza war has therefore not only been a conflict of bombs and bullets, but also a war of starvation, displacement, and fear that has scarred an entire population. Across the world, children are being swept into wars they did not start and cannot escape. Today, more than 470 million children live in places affected by conflict, which means nearly 1 in 5 children grows up surrounded by violence. In these places, going to school, playing outside, or even sleeping safely at night can be life-threatening. The United Nations tracks 6 major violations against children in war. The first is recruitment, where armed groups force children to become fighters, porters, cooks, or spies. Even when a child does not carry a gun, they are still exposed to danger and trauma. Between 2005 and 2022, more than 105,000 cases of child recruitment were officially verified, but the real number is believed to be much higher. The second violation is killing or maiming, where children are shot, bombed, or lose limbs in explosions. The third is abduction, where children are kidnapped from homes or schools. The fourth is sexual violence, where girls and boys are abused by soldiers or armed groups. The fifth violation is attacks on schools and hospitals, which rob children of education and healthcare. The sixth is denial of humanitarian access, which means aid workers cannot bring food, medicine, or shelter to kids who desperately need it. These violations are not just numbers. They describe very real stories. A child walking to school might be caught in crossfire. A girl in a refugee camp may be targeted for sexual abuse. A boy may be forced into an armed group and told to fight or be killed. In countries like South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo, these realities are happening every single day. Unless urgent protection is given, millions of children will grow up without safety, stability, or hope, and that will affect entire generations to come. The Sudanese Civil War erupted in April 2023 when the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces clashed in a power struggle. The fighting quickly spread through major cities. These battles often unfolded in densely populated neighborhoods where artillery, drones, and airstrikes hit homes, schools, hospitals, and crowded markets. Urban warfare left civilians with nowhere safe to shelter and no reliable way to escape. Reports from international observers state that tens of thousands of people have died directly from the violence, while many more face life-threatening conditions due to hunger and disease. Cities have been cut off from food, fuel, water, and medical aid. Hospitals cannot function without electricity, clean water, or basic medicines. Humanitarian agencies warn that millions are at risk of famine and outbreaks of disease. Cholera has already been reported in several regions where health systems collapsed. Without aid, civilians face a slow death from starvation or untreated illness. The atrocities extend beyond battlefield fighting. Human rights monitors and UN investigators have documented mass killings, executions without trial, deliberate looting, and the destruction of property. Witnesses describe villages burned, families executed, and survivors fleeing through dangerous terrain in search of safety. Millions of people have been forced from their homes, with many crossing borders into Chad, South Sudan, and Egypt. Families are separated in the chaos, with children often left stranded or at risk of recruitment by armed groups. Schools have closed across the country, cutting off education for an entire generation. Aid workers stress that the blockade of humanitarian convoys is as deadly as direct violence. Without a ceasefire and safe access for relief efforts, the crisis is expected to deepen. Burkina Faso, located in the central Sahel region of West Africa, has become one of the most violent conflict zones in the world. Since 2015, the rise of jihadist insurgencies, combined with ethnic tensions, has pushed the country into recurring cycles of bloodshed. Entire villages have been attacked, burned, and emptied, with survivors forced to flee. Ethnic massacres have become a grim feature of this war. In Burkina Faso, much of the violence involves Fulani, pastoralist communities, and Mossi farming communities. Jihadist groups often exploit these divisions by recruiting young Fulani men, then targeting Mossi villages with raids. In turn, local defense militias retaliate against Fulani civilians. This back and forth has left countless dead, with burned homes, destroyed granaries, and shattered communities. Survivors recount how fighters storm villages, round up men, women, and children, and kill indiscriminately before torching homes and food stores. Security forces have also been accused by human rights organizations of carrying out killings against civilians suspected of helping insurgents. In some cases, entire communities have been punished for alleged collaboration with jihadists. These abuses create a climate of fear where people distrust both the government and the insurgents. The numbers are difficult to confirm due to restricted access and unsafe roads, but independent monitors agree that hundreds to thousands of civilians have been killed in single incidents. Hundreds of thousands have fled their homes, seeking refuge in larger towns or across borders. Camps for displaced people are overcrowded and lack food, water, and medical supplies. Aid convoys struggle to reach vulnerable communities because roads are mined and patrolled by armed groups. Farmers cannot safely plant or harvest crops, raising fears of famine in the coming seasons. North Korea is one of the most closed and controlled societies in the world. The state, ruled by Kim Jong-un, exercises absolute power over its citizens, monitoring nearly every aspect of their daily lives. Sharing foreign movies, music, or even TV dramas is treated as a serious crime. According to a United Nations report, such acts are punishable by long prison terms or even public executions. People who escape the country describe how neighbors live in constant fear of surveillance, since anyone could be accused of disloyalty. Forced labor is another central part of control. Citizens are often sent to work in coal mines, farms, or construction sites under dangerous conditions. These assignments can last years and involve exhausting hours with almost no rest, poor food, and little medical care. Political prison camps hold tens of thousands of people. Inmates include not only those accused of political crimes, but sometimes their entire families, based on a policy of guilt by association. Survivors of these camps describe torture, forced confessions, and deaths caused by overwork or starvation. Many citizens are often arrested and punished without a fair trial. Attempting to leave the country without state permission is treated as betrayal. Those caught fleeing are usually detained, interrogated, and sometimes executed. Defectors who have escaped describe secret trials, where verdicts are already decided before the accused even speaks. Food insecurity remains a constant struggle. Many rely on government rations, which are often insufficient. Crop failures, floods, and droughts have made shortages worse, but authorities tightly control aid and often refuse international help. Reports describe entire regions facing hunger, with some families surviving only on grass or roots. Malnutrition is particularly severe among children, leading to stunted growth and long-term health problems. For many North Koreans, daily life is defined by fear, silence, and deprivation. Every action is measured against loyalty to the state, and even the smallest misstep can mean prison, torture, or death. The Rohingya are a Muslim ethnic group from Rakhine State in Myanmar. For decades, they have faced discrimination. Many of them are not allowed basic rights, such as education, healthcare, and freedom of movement. The most violent period began in 2017 when Myanmar's military launched a massive campaign against Rohingya villages. Soldiers and extremist groups carried out widespread killings, mass forced non-consensual sex acts, and the burning of entire communities. Within weeks, more than 700,000 people fled across the border to Bangladesh. Survivors describe massacres where families were shot, women were assaulted, and homes were set on fire. In recent years, the violence has continued. The Arakan Army, an ethnic armed group, has clashed with Myanmar's military. Both sides have carried out attacks that directly harm civilians. Reports describe artillery fire, drone strikes, and shelling of Rohingya villages, leaving people dead or forcing them to flee. Humanitarian organizations have warned that food, medicine, and clean water are often blocked from reaching those trapped by the conflict. Starvation has become a deliberate tactic. By restricting aid deliveries, authorities leave many Rohingya communities without enough food or clean water. Families struggle with malnutrition, and children are especially at risk of dying from preventable diseases. Camps for displaced people are overcrowded and unsafe. In Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, where more than 1 million Rohingya now live, tents are packed close together, and sanitation is poor. Fires, floods, and disease outbreaks frequently make conditions worse. Many survivors have lost parents, siblings, or children during attacks, and they carry deep trauma. Women and children are particularly vulnerable in refugee camps, where they face both insecurity and a lack of opportunities for education or future stability. Modern slavery in Colombia does not look like the chains and auctions of past centuries. Instead, it takes the form of forced labor, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, and forced marriage. According to the Global Slavery Index, in 2021, about 7.8 out of every 1,000 Colombians lived in some form of modern slavery. This translates to hundreds of thousands of people whose daily lives are dictated by coercion, debt bondage, or violence. Decades of internal armed conflict in Colombia have made this crisis even worse. Guerrilla groups, paramilitary organizations, and dissident fighters all used forced labor, kidnapping, and sexual slavery as tactics to control territory and terrorize civilians. In some areas, children were forcibly recruited as fighters, while women and girls were systematically exploited as sexual slaves. Sexual slavery has remained one of the most devastating features of this problem. Reports from regions like Catatumbo describe how women and girls are lured with false job offers, only to find themselves trapped in camps or brothels controlled by armed groups. Survivors have spoken of forced non-consensual sex, torture, and complete lack of freedom, with escape nearly impossible because perpetrators maintain strict control over territory. Many abuses never reach authorities because humanitarian access is so limited in these conflict zones. While Colombia has multiple laws addressing trafficking and forced labor, it lacks a unified system to coordinate prevention and prosecution. Industries such as mining and agriculture are particularly vulnerable, as workers in remote areas often lack protections, fall into debt bondage, and face threats that prevent them from leaving. With armed groups still active in many rural regions, and institutions often too weak to intervene, modern slavery in Colombia persists as both a human rights and a development crisis. The conflicts that erupted in Ethiopia in 2020 created one of the most severe humanitarian crises in recent history. Fighting between federal forces, regional militias, and armed groups has engulfed many areas. Reports from human rights organizations and independent observers describe killings of civilians, mass displacement, systematic sexual violence, and the deliberate destruction of livelihoods. Ethnic cleansing has been a defining feature of these conflicts. Civilians have been expelled from their homes because of their ethnicity, and entire villages have been burned to prevent their return. In many cases, food supplies and property were destroyed in order to erase the presence of targeted communities. Observers have documented that civilians were forced to flee through violence and threats, leaving behind their possessions and often separated from their families. This forced displacement has left millions uprooted, both internally and across neighboring borders. Medical professionals and investigators have documented widespread forced non-consensual sex acts, sexual torture, and cases of forced pregnancy. women and girls have reported being attacked in their homes, at checkpoints, and in detention facilities. Patterns across different regions suggest that sexual violence has been used as a deliberate weapon of war to intimidate communities, spread fear, and break social structures. The humanitarian blockade has added another layer of devastation. Aid groups report that food, medicine, and fuel were often prevented from reaching civilians in need. Hospitals in Tigray and other conflict zones ran out of supplies, leaving treatable injuries and illnesses to become fatal. With over 20 million Ethiopians requiring humanitarian assistance, aid obstruction has deepened the crisis, creating conditions of famine in areas already scarred by violence. The Uyghur people are a Turkic ethnic minority group, most of whom practice Islam, living primarily in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in northwest China. Since 2016, international observers, including the United Nations, have reported systematic repression targeting Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. More than 1 million individuals are believed to have been placed in so-called re-education centers, often without fair trials or legal procedures. Families are separated, detainees vanish without explanation, and relatives are left uncertain whether their loved ones are alive. Inside these detention facilities, harsh treatment has been widely documented. Survivors describe conditions of forced labor, overcrowding, inadequate food, and poor sanitation. They are required to study Mandarin, memorize state propaganda, and pledge loyalty to the government. Religious practices such as daily prayers, fasting, or possession of a Quran are prohibited. Punishments for disobedience are severe, ranging from solitary confinement to physical abuse. Allegations of torture and sexual violence have been reported by former detainees, further emphasizing the gravity of the violations. Uyghur women have been subjected to forced sterilization and coercive birth control measures. Population data shows steep declines in Uyghur birth rates in certain regions, suggesting an international policy to reduce minority population growth. Another significant abuse involves forced labor. Cotton and textile industries in Xinjiang are heavily tied to coerced Uyghur labor, with individuals compelled to work under threat of punishment. Workers often receive little pay, cannot refuse assignments, and lack basic freedom of movement. Despite mounting evidence and international condemnation, accountability remains elusive. China denies the allegations and continues to assert that the measures are part of counter-terror and poverty alleviation programs. Meanwhile, victims and their families remain trapped in an environment of repression, separation, and fear. Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as Artsakh, has long been a land filled with conflict. The region, populated mostly by Armenians, but located inside Azerbaijan's borders, has seen decades of struggle over who controls it. In September 2023, Azerbaijan launched a major military assault that ended with nearly every Armenian resident of the region forced to flee. More than 100,000 people left their homes in just a matter of days, creating one of the fastest forced displacements in modern times. This mass exodus came after months of a blockade that cut off the population from food, medicine, and fuel. Families were pushed to the brink of starvation, and many were left without access to critical medical treatment. The Lakan Corridor, the only road linking Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia, was blocked for months. Aid trucks were stopped, humanitarian missions were turned back, and essential supplies were left to rot at the border. This deliberate policy created conditions so severe that life in the region became unsustainable. Parents reported not being able to feed their children, hospitals ran out of basic drugs, and elderly people died because they could not receive treatment. For many, the choice became clear: either stay and face starvation, or flee everything they had known. In Nagorno-Karabakh, reports documented extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrest, and harassment of Armenian civilians by Azerbaijani forces. Armenian churches, cemeteries, and monuments were damaged or threatened with destruction, erasing centuries of history. Those who stayed behind were often the most vulnerable: elderly people who could not travel, individuals with disabilities, and the sick remained in fear of violence or neglect. For those who fled, their journeys were long and traumatic. Many left with nothing but what they could carry. refugees arriving in Armenia found themselves in overcrowded shelters, often struggling to access food, employment, and education. Human rights groups and government have called for accountability, but survivors continue to live with the uncertainty of exile, cut off from the homes, land, and heritage that define their community for centuries. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been locked in cycles of violence for decades, but recent years have brought a new wave of atrocities. Armed groups, including the M23 rebels and the Allied Democratic Forces, carry out brutal campaigns against civilians. Villages are raided, homes are burned, and people are massacred. Both rebel fighters and government soldiers have been accused of committing war crimes, leaving civilians trapped in the middle. Thousands of boys and girls are abducted and forced to serve as fighters, porters, or spies. Some are sent to dangerous battle zones, while others are subjected to horrific abuse, including sexual violence. Children on their way to school have been kidnapped, and entire communities have been disrupted by armed groups storming villages. In July 2025, the M23 group executed more than 140 civilians across multiple villages in North Kivu. Many of the victims were farmers, women, and children, attacked while working in their fields or hiding in their homes. These killings were systematic and intended to terrorize communities into fleeing, leaving fertile land and resources under the control of armed groups. Women and children are forced into non-consensual sex during raids, in captivity, or while attempting to flee. Health services in many regions have collapsed, leaving victims without treatment or support. Over 1 million people have been displaced since late 2022. Many now live in makeshift camps without clean water, food, or proper medical care. Disease spreads quickly in overcrowded shelters, and children suffer from malnutrition. Aid workers struggle to reach these areas because of roadblocks, insecurity, and constant attacks on convoys. Investigations are ongoing, but progress is slow, and justice has been elusive. The people of Eastern Congo remain trapped in a cycle of violence, displacement, and suffering that shows no clear end in sight. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February 2022 sparked one of the largest wars in Europe since World War II. The humanitarian consequences have been devastating, with widespread reports of war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. Russian forces have repeatedly shelled residential neighborhoods, schools, hospitals, and critical infrastructure. Thousands of civilians have been killed, many more injured, and millions displaced from their homes. Targeted strikes on power plants and energy facilities have plunged cities into darkness and deprived civilians of heating, water, and electricity. Indiscriminate attacks have been among the most alarming patterns. These include the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, which by nature cannot distinguish between civilians and military targets. Human rights monitors and local witnesses report cases of torture, extrajudicial executions, and forced disappearances in occupied territories. Survivors describe brutal treatment such as beatings, sleep deprivation, mock executions, and other forms of cruelty. Thousands of Ukrainian children have reportedly been kidnapped and taken to Russian camps or facilities where they are exposed to political indoctrination and, in some cases, military training. These children are separated from their families, sometimes adopted into Russian households, and taught ideologies intended to erase Ukrainian identity. Between December 2024 and May 2025, nearly 1,000 civilians were confirmed killed in conflict-related violence, though real numbers are believed to be much higher due to lack of access in occupied zones. Infrastructure destruction has left millions without reliable healthcare, safe housing, or clean water. Humanitarian groups often face blocked access, making the delivery of aid difficult. The combination of indiscriminate attacks, forced transfers, destruction of civilian life, and suppression of identity demonstrates why the conflict is consistently described as a site of ongoing crimes against humanity. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below your thoughts on any of the crimes against humanity I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.